Till now we have been talking about the complexities of organizational behavior and how it needs to be understood. Here we are looking into three things. One is the structure of the organization, which is the latest approach. Secondly, it is the interdisciplinary part, how psychology affects organizational behavior, and lastly how the structure and behavior they are related. So let's start with the structure, because we talked about the projects last time. The latest structure, due to this project part, it is superimposed on functional structure, the project structure, and project is time bound, goal bound and technology bound. So when they are integrated into an organization, the result is a matrix, and most of the developing organizations or the organizations which are adjusting to the needs of the time are having this kind of matrix design, and this design is laterally spread and there is no hierarchy as such. There is no line staff division and of course no hierarchy. It breaks the formal groups, informal groups, which emerges usually from the relatively permanent work groups, because there is nothing permanent as such. So work groups continue changing, and production man in one kind of, say the national and the international, the production is the same, but there can be national division, there can be international division. So when they are permanent, there are permanent work groups. When there is no possibility of a permanent work group, then the emergence of informal groups is also not possible. So the advantage of a matrix design of organization, that it creates a repository of specialists, and these specialists are available for functional structure. We do not have the hierarchical structure, but we have the functional structure. Now this is very advantageous for the transnational or organizations, multinational organizations which have no geographical boundaries. India can set up its production across the world can set up its production unit in India. You already know that the IT hub, that is American, the production hub which was Chinese, they are all established worldwide, and these are the transnational or MNCs that we know. Now these are network of production as well as service providing people, organizations, units, and the central hub. There has to be some central hub, because the control, direction, vision, all these are to be emanating from the central hub. So they are all around this central hub. Another advantage is that they do not need any particular location or an organization. They can function from different kinds of locations, which is very evident these days due to, of course, the pandemic. Work from home, how is it possible that without going to the organization, people are still working, people are active? Because the geographical limits are removed, and this is basically an outsourcing to different agencies, and these are connected electronically to a central office. But one issue that you have to keep in mind, there is a standard prescribed by the main company, and these standards are mutually agreed when the job contract is signed. So, you may be wearing an apparel, the raw material for which has been provided by a country like Bangladesh or India. It is put into a size or a style as decided by the norms of the society, and they are stitched at a different location, but following certain guidelines. So, this is the advantage of matrix organizations, and it is not that the rules do not sustain themselves, but they are not strictly prescribed, but mutually agreed from time to time. So, there is no permanent fixture as such. The another model is goal oriented model, where the main thing, understanding the goal, that is basically knowing what is to be done. Now, this is empowerment of the individual as well as the group, where they are enabled to understand, compare and recognize whatever is required. So, this cognitive ability is the mainstay which is able to receive the requirements, organize itself as per the requirement and respond to any external stimulus. This is basically a conjoining or bringing parity between what is existing, that is latent state of mind, and manifest behavior, how we behave. To summarize, it may sound a little difficult, but this cognition is basically recognizing the goal, recognizing the processes that are required for reaching the goal, recognizing the materials that are needed for making the product or service, and understanding who provides, what kind of people are required, what kind of mindset is required to be put into those people, and this is basically a proactive way of understanding the organizational behavior, relating it to its structure, then this basic understanding going towards its goals, and how do we formulate the goals, reformulate them, change them. All these parts are the cognitive ability of the individual. If it is not developed, then it will be difficult to put it into practice. So, what happens here? This is a triangular model. One part is the person, the individual with his or her differences, abilities. The other is the behavior that is exhibited or expected to be exhibited by the person, and how environment at the base, how environment is going to affect both the person as well as his or her behavior. Now, for this we need some psychological perspectives to understand the person, the behavior and the environment. I mean, the first one to start was Freud's. You are all familiar with this name, very popular. Here what he has given is the frames of mind which are in conflict with each other, and these three you always know: id, ego and superego. What do they mean? And let me briefly tell you. Id is the basic latent energy that we are born with, meaning like a child. The child wants to do whatever he or she wants to do. That is the id, but it does not have any action. It may be in the managerial mind, the power, that is id. for the manager. Ego is the active component of the mind, where how to put those desires emanating from the id are to be achieved. So ego is the worker. Even manager is a worker. So just don't restrict the term to workers at the blue collar level. It is applicable to all. Whosoever works is a worker, and that is his ego. Do whatever the id wants you to do. And the superego is the social conscience. Here is the environment. Superego is basically restrictive in nature, which tells you what to do, what should be done, what should not be done. So id, you can, if you put it grammatically, is what is there by nature. Ego, how to put into function what is there, and superego is the whether it should be done or not done. So that is how the management and organizational behavior is understood. And the other is the unconscious motivation. Whatever is suppressed, especially coming from id, and not put into action by ego, becomes your unconscious motivation. But that is for the psychoanalyst to go into. But for our understanding, the organizational behavior can be understood to some extent, but is too static in its nature, Freudian approach. The other is we already discussed, is the cognitive approach by Tolman, who emphasized the positive and free will aspects of human behavior. The behavior is not taken as irrational or motivated sexually by the human being, rather it is understanding what we cognize and what we understand and we want to put into practice by our free will. This is giving a freedom from the restrictions that have been imposed by Freud. Next theory that helps us in understanding behavior in organization is the behavior theory. Here main thing is the stimulus, what causes behavior and what is the response. The SR theory, stimulus response theory, response we take it as manifest behavior, not automatic like eye blinking or knee jerk, but something which can be caused. And Pavlov is one of the names that I can put in here, who said that the behavior can be conditioned and behavior can be caused by certain stimulus. So this is the stimulus response theory, and it is also, will come in the later part, also applied to organizational behavior. The behavior is just not restricted in stimulus and response. For example, to the hungry person give the food that is a stimulus, and the response is eating. Same way, you give certain instructions, that is the stimulus, and the worker behaves as per your instructions, that is the response. Next part that we come is that is just not S and R, it is there is a C, that is consequence. What is the consequence of a behavior is going to shape your behavior. The behavior which leads to negative consequences will be extinguished, will be removed, and the behavior which have pleasant or positive consequences will be repeated. So the mainstay here is that whatever behavior you expect in organizations must have pleasant consequences, then only you can expect it to be repeated and maybe modified in a pleasant way. Then we come to another perspective, which is SOR, which is stimulus, organism and response. The focus is on individual differences. Every organism is different. No two individuals are same. So, the whole approach is that the individual is a component, his or her socialization, understanding, abilities, these are intervening between the stimulus and the response. I had also said earlier that the same stimulus cannot cause the same response, and this happens because of the interventions of the organism, the person. Same training may be given to a lot of people, but they may not behave in the same way because they are individuals. So, you cannot have a mechanical approach towards organizational behavior, because there is an individual who is committing, doing the behavior. And one way, my favorite approach is by Fred Luthans, a very well known organizational behaviorist, where he is integrating all. He is talking about the stimulus, whatever incentive or purpose that you have the you are there organism, then your behavior and what kind of consequence the behavior has produced. This is the SOBC model, which is a combination of stimulus response, SOR, stimulus, organism and response, and includes the total person. Plus, one very important thing is the human dignity of the person. A person has to have the capacity to decide whether to work or not to work. If it interferes with his or her dignity, then the person may not like to function like a machine, not in the expected way, because it interferes with the dignity. And that is why, especially in these days, looking at the women workers, people are not paying attention to the dignity of women, and they are putting into various mechanisms which were taken by the women as barriers, as barricades to their development. But these barricades were actually not barricades of the individual, they were barricades to their dignity. So, this is the way, following the SOBC model, we can understand the human dignity and effectively put people's behavior in a particular way. And this paradigm is becoming very popular in today's world. Another thing is social learning by Albert Bandura, where Bandura took this position that behavior is continuously reciprocal interaction between cognitive, behavioral and environmental determinants, meaning thereby that according to Bandura, people usually pursue what is socially learned. In other words, what is socially approved, and this social learning is a major factor in affecting behavior, especially in organization. If the union says don't produce, they don't produce. As an individual, they may not be in tandem with union's instructions, but people look for social approval, and this is how this society runs in a positive manner and the barricades are removed, which is contingent on socially approved objectives. Let me remind you here that organizations do not have their own resources. They are allocated by the society, and society will allocate only if it is approved, and society looks into the objectives why. So, let me remind you at this, the why, what and how, all these questions are put. So, if you want to put it in a model, it is a systemic model where the input is the resource, throughput is the process by which it may be a machine, it may be a human mind, it may be anything, throughput, whatever you put for action, and the output, the resultant factor. It can go back again, the output may become an input for future action. Now, in the formal organizational system, the throughput is decided by the organization and it has to be in tandem with individual system, that is IS, and social system. So, FOS, IS and SS, all these are working in tandem for any organization. The interface between the three has to be understood, because the formal organizational system, that is the FOS, is usually in the driver's seat and it affects the individual system as well as social system, and ultimately the result is the organizational behavior. But please remember, OB is not an end in itself. OB is a mean to achieve main output of the system, namely organizational effectiveness. That is a prime objective. To be efficient is different to be effective. Let me just explain it here. Efficiency means that if you are putting in 10 rupees, it should come out at least 11. It must become 11. But that is the efficiency. Effectiveness is that what are you going to do with that extra 1 rupee for the human being, for the society, for the world, for the environment. All these things, multiple things, they become organizational effectiveness. You just can't exploit the nature and become rich. You are not being effective. You may be efficient. You just can't keep on running your car and pollute the environment. You may be efficient but not effective. So, at the end of the day, it is the effectiveness which matters, and effectiveness is what determines the positive behavior of people, because OB can be both positive and negative. So, let me tell you that the positive behavior needs reinforcement and negative behavior, detrimental behavior, needs change, that is the modification. If you reinforce the positive behavior and modify the negative behavior, because you cannot totally obliterate the negative behavior, it leads to organizational effectiveness, which is the end result, which should be the end result of organization. And we have already talked about the interface between technology and human resources, which creates a structure, and structure should not be rigid. The whole aspect is authority should not presuppose anything, and leadership indicates managerial style. Actually, In today's world, the manager is not manager only, he or she is an organizational leader. That we have to keep in mind. And the metric design we have already talked about, and the advantage of metric design is it creates a repository of specialists, and you know whom to consult by this information. The OB models we have already talked about. Let me briefly tell you, there is custodial model, like a university which does not have a financial gain at its objective. It actually takes the people in its own fold and uses its resources to develop them, and organizational dependence is not the main aim. They are independent, and the performance rate is pretty high if you follow the custodial model. The supportive model is related to custodial model, where the leadership is towards participation and involvement of employees in decision making. And then we have the collegial model, the team concept, the group concept, the project concept. Responsibility is the mainstay of each and every individual employee. They need very little direction, and self-development makes the climate conducive and going towards self-fulfillment and self-actualization, which is the main aim of human existence. Thank you very much.